everyone. My name is Kenan, and I'm the Global Product Owner for Analytics in PUMA. So today I'm going to speak about how we changed to GA4, how we migrated our setup, as well as what challenges we saw during the migration, because right now we have a global regional setup. And in doing so, we also have to do the privacy and the setup in a server-side version. So I will just start with the agenda today. So first of all, I will just briefly introduce you for the project and PUMA brand. And then I will just talk about the challenges that we faced. And then the solutions that we have implemented, following with the benefits and outcomes that we have observed. And then finally, I will just leave you guys with some key takeaways and recommendations that I have for in a similar session. And finally, I will leave the floor for some Q&A and your questions. So starting with PUMA at a glance, we are operating in 30 regions and markets globally, and we offer diverse product lines, and we have the platforms in websites and apps in different regions. And our project's goal was to build a unified framework for our analytics setup, especially during the sunset from GA3 to GA4. Also, we had to obviously consider the fact that the framework should be scalable, because we have operating in a global setup. It has to be compliant for privacy, especially in certain markets. There are strict rules that we need to comply with. And of course, the consistency is also important, because since we have different regions and different platforms, one of the issues we faced was that every region have different platforms. So for instance, we have Salesforce-based platforms, we have Magento-based platforms, as well as headless platforms, where headless is you separate the backend with the front end, so they work independently. So I will just go through this journey and what we have achieved so far. So first, we will start with the challenges that we faced. So basically, PUMA is actually not that old like some other brands in the e-commerce business. So it dates back to like 5 or 6 years. So when I first joined, obviously I wanted to check the current setup and then create a framework around it. So the first thing that I noticed was that there wasn't obviously a unified framework. So this was one of the first steps that we need to make. And then the documentation, obviously this is always a problem with many companies. So there were an absence of documentation as well. And finally, the communication was not also great. As you might know, always there is a silos, and when it's a global setup like this, in different markets, different regions, which with their own cultural and setup differences, communication is also a key part for this. And then next, I had a look at the existing setup that is in place, mostly on GA3, obviously, at that time. And one of the issues was that the event tracking was not sufficient. We were also using GA4 and GA3 in parallel. But for the sake of the transition, we checked GA4 as well, and the parameters were not used much, and usually specific events were created instead of compiling them into one event and then in a parameter. Obviously, tag management was even a bigger problem, because it was cluttered and there were GA3 and GA4 tags mixed within each other, as well as different containers within the regions. Finally, of course, all of these results in data quality and trust issues. So in the analytics setup, if you are a product owner, digital analytics manager, etc., I think your first goal is to have the trust in data, especially from different stakeholders and throughout the company. So this was also a problem that we had. And finally GA3 was coming, the GA3 sunset was coming, and it was also creating lots of stress throughout the company and in the globe. So obviously the technical diversity was there, as I mentioned. So in the regions, the systems and technical challenges were there. Regional variations, especially during the local requirements, because sometimes regions have different payment methods, different languages that they send, and they were all coming from different platforms. And these are all creating unique challenges to solve for us during the time. Also up to the time that the sunset is happening. So that was also an issue that we had to take care of the timelines that we are under. Finally, regional regulatory differences were there. So we were working with GDPR and CCPA, but other than that, in UK, Japan, and other regions like Digital Africa that we call, they have their own setups. So we had to take into these also when we were trying to solve our solutions and then doing our compliance for privacy. And next challenge that we saw was that the lack of visibility. So when I first joined and then started to check the setup, there was some support tickets going around, but there was no global or a local view at least, where you can see all the bottlenecks, the progress, how it is going, what are the requests from regions, which stage they are in. It was also creating some miscommunication, obviously. And then the processes were not really standardized, so that this unstructured way of working is also causing a lot of issues for us. And the workloads and delays and errors were also coming sometimes from these kind of issues and inefficiencies. Obviously, as I mentioned, this all created and led skepticism around the data, which is, I think, the thing that you wouldn't want for sure. It's one of the things that everyone must try to avoid around data accuracy and the trust, and the lack of documentation. So we were just knowing what is needed, what are the challenges, and then we would come to the solutions and the implementation that we have to do. Other than this, obviously, onboarding is also an important part because teams evolve, right? Some people just leave your teams, some of them come back, and this is also the onboarding stage where it needs to be fast and agile so that people are aware of what is going on, what they expect, and understand the setup instead of spending 1 month or 2 months or 3 months to just understand the system in place. So one of the issues in most of the companies, I think, is that you need to get the buy-in from the higher management. Because if you are just trying to do it by yourself, you can only go so far. So the first need was to clear communication. So you need to manage the expectations. You need to understand what's to be coming, and you need to explain this to your stakeholders. This could be marketing team or some C-levels or whoever they are, but the stakeholders need to have their buy-in for you, and they need to support you. Of course, PUMA is also a global and a big brand, like a corporation. There is always resistance to change. So for these, I think the methodologies and the engagement that you are doing has to be both in the global level, also in the local level. So for this one, we created one program that's called Champions. So we picked some people in each of the regions that are really close and working closely with us. And we call them analytics champions. And then instead of us working directly with all the regions, all the teams, and all the people with the questions, we assigned these champions as our representatives so that they could distribute the information to their local teams. And any questions, they were kind of a filter for us. So if there is a trivial question that they can ask, they can answer. they would just handle it, and any complicated questions would come to us, so that the workload was also kind of balanced for this. And one of the key things that I really liked about working in PUMA is the organization culture. It was really supportive. Despite all these challenges, all the known issues, I think the culture is really supported me, especially, because probably people are, coming into this. Someone always has an opinion, but if you are the expert, I think you need to be kind of the leader, and then it should be respected. And I've never had a problem in this one. So this is one of the key things, I think. Now I will go to the solutions that we implemented, how we tackle these problems, and what we try to achieve. So first of all, we created this Jira project called GData, which is the global data project that we have, in collaboration with track and support team. In this one, everything is coming together from the regions or the global teams that we see. And then we support 30 plus regions in multiple time zones and different development teams, since we have different platforms, unfortunately. And then the benefits were obviously clarity, visibility, accountability, and tracking of the workload. So this also comes with the different metrics that Jira always gives you, like the request types, volumes, which regions are asking for the most questions, how much time we are spending on them, things like that. So in this framework, we started to understand things, I think, better as time goes by. So we have a workflow for this, and this is also important in my opinion. It's the two-way visibility that I'm calling it. So usually visibility or accountability lies on the analytics persons. But with this way, we try to make it both ways. So if you are asking for something, you need to do the follow-up. It's not just about the team that's supporting you. You also support the teams around you and the actual analytics team as well, so that it can be managed effectively. Obviously, the new processes that we put in place created increased output for us because there were no vague points, and then the inefficiencies were eliminated. And then examples of success. So we have real-time tracking enabled. We have clear metrics for requests handled and the priorities that were set. Obviously, the elephant in the room is GA4. So for this one, we had to do lots of work because it was a GA3 and GA4 altogether. So for this one, we implemented a common data layer for everything, for all the regions within the framework, using the consolidated events instead of with the parameters, instead of creating single events for each parameter, like a GA3 mindset. So we had to break that one. And then we implemented server-side tracking. So we migrated most of the regions to server-side GTM to enhance the control of data and the privacy. And then we established some standards. So, and these are really strict. So for the events parameters and the values that they could have to avoid errors. And we always take care of this for all the regions. Of course, we did different behind the scenes work, like using APIs and others. But these are the main things that we created in the framework and the architecture. So now coming to the GTM, it's also, as I said, a bit problematic with the patchwork and daily savings, I guess, firefighting mostly. So we had multiple countries in a single container. For instance, you have Europe along with Southeast Asia. And then all these regions are different, and their tags and their marketing vendors, everything is different. So this was actually creating inconsistent tags, lots of rules, lots of triggers, especially on the GTM, as well as privacy, since we are using OneTrust and then managing it through GTM. So what we wanted to make is to split all these regions from each other and then give them their own containers. reducing these complexities. Of course, there is an overhead, obviously, with the, like 30 or so containers for each country, but overall, we thought that these complexities creating errors as well, and then we thought that this approach would be the best way going forward. Finally, we also have publishing priorities and policies. We are not allowing anyone to publish their text like that. So for this one, we also have control over it because especially before the transition, you have, for instance, Europe and someone from Thailand, if they want to publish something, they can break something for Europe. And since it's time zone difference and we are in Germany, it happens in Japan time, for instance, we are at the bed, obviously, we are sleeping. We wake up and then something happened, right? And then it's the lots of problems, to be honest. So you want to avoid that. So these kind of strict rules are what is needed for a global setup, I think. So for server-side tracking, we obviously follow the best practices together with Tracken, how we control the data, how it is flowing through GCP and our subdomain. And then data is collected obviously through the our one common data layer to GTM, to GA4, and to other marketing platforms. And we also implemented a real-time monitoring for the GCP and server-side GTM. So how it works is that, so we send especially on the transaction and the product information, we send it not only to Google servers, but we also send it to PubSub, and from there we create a table in BigQuery where we can just see how it is going, and then with the dashboards for the regions, they can also follow this together. So whatever is going through the server side, we also send it, and then it's created in the dashboard so that if there is a problem, we can see, because real-time reports in GA4 is good, but yeah, obviously they are not granular or robust as they can be in the interface. But with this solution, we also have a good monitoring system in place, which obviously we want to build up in the later stages. So for GA4, this is not PUMA, this is just Google Domain Store. So full setup is there. So we just used all the features that GA4 gives us, obviously, like data imports, key events, channel groups, and so on. We also created the same channel grouping called global marketing channels for all the regions, so that there is a common understanding, because otherwise, every region could just create their own channel groupings, which could create inconsistencies, especially on roll-up reports if you do in a global setup. Obviously, we set up data modeling and consent management for conversions where the consent management is working. Obviously, we don't have privacy policies or consent management in all the regions, because still some of the countries, they don't care, obviously, yet. But yeah, where there is a consent management, we just do it that way. Integration, obviously, we integrated everything with Power BI, Looker, and BigQuery for our reporting needs. Yeah, for privacy, we also, as I said, like strict again for the policies that we have using OneTrust. Data handling, we don't obviously send any IDs or PII information, especially when consent is no. And we collaborated, or I collaborated a lot with the legal teams when it was the time for the setups, especially with the marketing vendors. Of course, server side allows you to do these controls easier. So if you have any problems, you can just transform or drop these information that's not supposed to go anywhere. So it helps us with this. Obviously, we also moved most of the marketing text to the server side for performance gains as well as privacy enhancements. And then, yeah, we also reduced the exposure for the information by using server-to-server communications. For the first-party data utilization, we employ conversion APIs from Google and Facebook, and we are trying to move everything to first-party and then to the server side as using the templates and the different means in server-side GTM. We are developing customer profiles in the BI using this first-party data as part of the input. And obviously, we are participating in all the beta programs that we can get our hands on. One of them being the BQML advanced audiences, for instance, and another is user-provided data, so on and so forth. So now I will go and explain what we did achieve, what we achieved after doing these implementations, and what were the outcomes. So obviously, we streamlined all of the operations, and then we simplified the management and reduced the errors. We ensured reliable data, and stakeholders were also empowered to do whatever they want and with the trust that they could give us. On the marketing side, we could use personalized campaigns using first-party data. We could just go deeper into the advanced analytics part using the data that we collect globally in a unified manner with audiences sent from GA to Google Ads, for instance. We could do this globally or regionally, whatever the way you want, and optimize the ad spend as well from these outcomes. On the performance side, obviously, we enhanced the performance of our sites because the faster loads and better user experience were one of the results that we had. Our framework is future-proof. We have this set up in. So if there are new regions coming in, for instance, we launched Peru recently, a few months back. So it's just easy to add new regions to the setup because of the framework that we have. And if any changes coming in from privacy, we are also kind of ready for those changes. For the metrics, we have different requests tracked by region, and we have the clarity on the request, who is doing what is coming to us, and so on. And one of the big cases that we had was about enhanced conversions. So where we used enhanced conversions, we see a single and to double-digit increase in the conversions, where we had the enhanced conversions set up in key markets like Japan, UK, and EU, and more regions will be added. So this was one of the, I think, best results that we have from this setup. And next one is about GA4 tracking itself. So it's always a pain, I think, when you have a transaction tracking and the transactions are not matching with the OMS or some of the backend systems that someone else is using. You would get lots of questions around this, why this is not matching, why it's not matching. And with the server side and the framework, we are now tracking 95% of our transactions with the server side setup. We will be implementing, obviously, refunds and partial refunds and cancellations as well. But for the time being, we are around 95% accuracy. So key learnings around this is, I think, first one is the managing the expectations. It's really important. Another is collaborative success. So you need to work together with everyone. And the most important one, especially for analytics people, I think, is to be approachable. So you need to be patient. You need to be showing a response to anyone interested with you. And when working across different regions, it's of course more important to work that way and try to understand different levels of understanding, because not everyone obviously knows it as much as you do. So in the conclusion part and key takeaways, so finally we achieved the transformation. We have now one single framework that's collecting the data for us in different websites over all the globe. We have 2 apps. They are also in the same framework. So even though we have 3 different platforms and 2 different apps, we are now using the same framework. for collecting the data and using the server side. Next one is the collaboration, obviously, especially with your stakeholders and regional teams. And of course, we are committed to privacy where it is needed. We'll always do a zero tolerance policy, so we don't try to cut corners and so on. So key takeaways and actions for future for you guys is to adopting a unified framework. This is important. You don't need to, or you don't want to have differences between different stakeholders or regions. Server-side tracking is obviously a really good choice and something that's really required, in my opinion. Consent management, yeah, especially in Europe and some specific and big regions, it's important. First-party data, as you saw from the case study and the increase that we had, it's also important, especially in these times. So it's not urgent anymore, obviously, or you just track everything and everyone. Infrastructure is also important. For this, we are using GCP, obviously. And again, the most important thing is you need to keep it together. You need to enforce and continue to maintain your framework and your standards across regions or across different departments or different countries. Wherever you work in your setup, you have to keep it in the same way. You shouldn't cut corners.